And she said, Kelly, I just want you to know I would do this all over again because in a couple hours, we're going to meet your baby. And it was like, who thinks of that while in like some of the most intense pain of their entire life? I have adapted to living life with one arm my whole life. Or not, I shouldn't say my whole life, since the accident.
Sure, yeah.
And it wasn't until I had a baby that I was brutally reminded that I have a disability.
So you want to introduce Kelly?
Yes, we are so happy today. We have our really wonderful friend and photographer and just all in general amazing, empowering, inspiring person, Kelly. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you so much for
happy
having
to
me.
have you. A little background, I want to just share quickly how I know Kelly. It kind of was a magical thing. On my 30th birthday, I really wanted to do an empowerment shoot. And I had set it up with this person, and this person ended up moving out of the state, and it was this whole thing, and she gave me Kelly's name. And so it was a really happy accident that we connected, and I just feel like that's just Kelly. Like there's a lot of magic around her. So it was a really great experience, and here we are today.
Yeah, so Kelly has been our go-to photographer whenever we needed help or wanted to do something special. Kelly has been on our speed dial. People are always asking whether or not they're like, you guys have a photographer on speed dial? Well, here she is.
Yes, everyone's always like, a photographer just following you around everywhere you go. And not everywhere we go.
This is her. This is the woman.
She's
who
a live-in
makes it
photographer.
happen.
No, we're just kidding. I know, we're kind of out of shape right now for all the eating. And you've also been so helpful. You're not just a photographer. You're so helpful in like the creative aspect of things, especially like for my branding of Bliss Theory and just like me and Zach's brands in general. You've just been so incredibly helpful beyond all of that and really a mentor to me in a lot of ways, which I've always appreciated. So it's really special to have you here today.
Thank you so
very
much.
Excited.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kelly has an amazing story, and she is an amazing mother.
Aww.
So we just wanted to talk to you and hear more about your story and learn more about you today.
Well, my journey to motherhood looked a lot different than my friends or actually anyone that I'd ever met. I was struggling with infertility for about 3 years, and we just kept kind of coming back to this question of, could I carry? And to kind of give you a backstory that would probably be helpful is I was actually in a car accident when I was 12, and it paralyzed a fourth of my body. And so from there, I also have severe chronic nerve pain as a result of the nerve damage that came from that accident. So I have to have medications to manage that, and there were just a lot of different medical hindrances or things that could potentially hinder you from getting pregnant. And so we really were trying to figure out if it was going to be possible. And after 3 years, they ultimately said, sorry, like you just can't carry. It's just not a safe option for you. And that was pretty devastating, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I just took a break from it altogether. I felt like I just needed to just like put it to the side and kind of regroup before we were ready to make a decision of what the next step was. And in that time, my cousin approached me, and she and I have this really beautiful friendship and relationship. And when we were 16, she told me, Kelly, if you ever need someone to carry a baby for you, I would do that. And that's a pretty unique thing for a 17-year-old to be thinking about.
Right, yeah.
I think for her it was interesting because the accident happened when I was 12. So for her, it was like one of her best friends went from being really active and healthy to in and out of the hospital, in and out of surgery. And so I think she was definitely thinking like her life really changed. So she offered that, and honestly, I thought, well, I'll probably have my own kids, so thanks though. And it just went in one ear and out the other. And I never thought about it again, but it just remained on her heart. She just kept thinking about it. And so when she actually got married, she told her husband, or her fiance at the time, before they got married, she just said, hey, I want to give you a heads up. We're going to get married, but I just want to let you know, I really feel like called to do this for my cousin. Like my cousin, if she ever needs me to carry a baby for her, I would love to do that. And I just want to give you a heads up going into our marriage that this is something I really feel called to do.
Like it was that present in her like
Yeah.
all times.
Right.
That she felt like this might happen. I need to communicate this to my partner and make them aware.
Right.
That's amazing.
Right. And he was like, you mean your cousin that's backpacking Europe and single? And she's like, I know, it's crazy. But I just am giving you a heads up.
Wow.
And 12 years later, we went through our fertility journey. And then when they ultimately said we couldn't, she reached out and said, do you remember this conversation? And honestly, I didn't remember it.
Because you guys weren't talking about this ongoing as the years had
We had
passed. She
never-
just had this internal, this is what I'm going to be able to do or need to do for my cousin or want to do.
Right.
That's so interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
we talked about it once and
Wow.
then never talked about it again. And it's also actually really hard to be a surrogate. It's like you have to have 2 pregnancies that have 0 complications and 2 births,
Like,
0
like
complications.
through like vaginal births.
Everything, yeah.
Oh, wow.
So it's actually you can have a heart to want to do it,
Right.
but you might not actually be eligible.
Interesting.
And then you have to go through a whole psych evaluation, and it's a pretty long process. So we did IVF and had our little embryo, and then it was transferred to Lexi, and everything happened so beautifully. And honestly, we are so thankful that it played out the way it did, because she was born 5 weeks before the world shut down,
during COVID or right
January
before COVID.
30th.
Really?
So you could be there in the room because she
Right.
didn't live in the same state, right?
She was in Pennsylvania.
Oh my gosh.
So, and I'm in Seattle. So if it had been any later or COVID had hit earlier, I was flying back and forth to go to all these medical appointments.
Oh my gosh.
To support her and to send her to get massages and to, whatever I could do. I was flying back and forth from Seattle to Pennsylvania.
Oh my gosh.
And then I was there present at the birth. She actually asked at the very end if I would crawl in bed with her and help pace her breathing. And we had this one moment where she I'm crying, sobbing, and she's crying, and she just said, she leaned over to me and she said, Kelly, I just want you to know I would do this all over again, because in a couple hours we're gonna meet your baby. And it was like, who thinks of that while in some of the most intense pain of their entire life? And Jules came into this world, and Juliana Isabel. So that's how Jules came to be.
That's
How did
literally
you
so
decide
beautiful.
on the name, by the way?
Juliana, we just loved, in general, we loved the name, and we wanted a name that was bilingual. My husband is Ecuadorian, and his family's in South America. And so we just wanted a name that was easy in both languages, and we really liked the flow of it.
It's beautiful and elegant.
And I really liked the nickname Jules. I thought it was a cute nickname. And Isabel is my grandmother's middle name. And she was a powerhouse of a woman. So I was like, oh, that'll be a good
Good combo.
legacy.
And we've had the pleasure of meeting Jules, and she sure is all of those things. She is a powerful little lady. So
little firecracker.
I love it.
When you were in the beginning stages of your fertility journey, what was your process? What was it like going through that? And was there anything that you found, if you were to give yourself advice, your past self-advice, what do you think you would have told yourself?
I would have a lot of advice for what my friends could do differently.
Well, I'd like to hear that.
But,
Because honestly...
or not my friends. I have a lot of amazing friends, but I would say people in general.
Right, sure.
But for myself, I think you have to kind of protect yourself the way that you need to, and feel safe to put up boundaries if you need them. And just because it can be hard to watch so many different pregnancy announcements and whatever when you're in that struggle for so long. For me personally, that was not something that was a big struggle for much of it, but for my friends that have dealt with infertility, that can be a big trigger. So I think just feeling safe to have boundaries where you need them, and whatever is going to help protect your mental health. And I think ultimately I had faith one day we would have a family, and I just had to start kind of releasing the control and realizing there's so many beautiful ways to parenthood, and I just need to become more open to however this path is going to come, because each path is so powerful and so beautiful no matter how people can become parents. And so I just really started to focus on the beauty of each individual experience, and realizing my story is going to look different than I may have expected, but I know from my past life experience that we will find beauty in it.
And I think that's so important, and I think it slowly is becoming more mainstream to be open with stories like yours and surrogacy and infertility, and that's something that Zach and I always try to be really sensitive to, that everyone's journey can look different, and that's okay. And parenthood, even, to the extent of adoption, is so beautiful and important. And I definitely have had friends that have struggled with fertility as well. And seeing those announcements can be hurtful. And I think that as a society, we can be more gentle, by celebrating ourselves still, and like celebrating your happiness and your pregnancy and you bringing your baby, but also acknowledging that there is pain around that for some people.
It's one of those things where unless you've experienced it, it's not something that your mind goes to, I think, for a lot of people. And just in our journey, that's something that we've learned a lot more about, and we've tried to be sensitive in the way that we have discussions. But you said you had advice for your friends, and I'd love to hear what was your advice for your friends,
or someone that might be going through this.
I shouldn't say friends, because actually my friends were also really great, but friends/community, people in general.
Right.
And this can be applied to a lot of different topics, but I think people are very quick to want to put a pretty bow on it and put a pretty spin on everything. When something that someone's experiencing, it's actually really important that we just listen first and validate their experience, validate how they're feeling. We don't have to have the perfect thing to say. And we can actually even say, I'm actually not really sure what to say right now. I know this has been such a long journey and this is such a hard journey. I just want you to know that I'm there for you. And I'm so sorry that you're walking through this. You can just say that.
Yeah.
And I think people feel this pressure to say the perfect thing when someone's going through infertility or someone's going through something really hard. And so then they just don't say anything at all because they don't want to say the wrong thing.
They're like fearful.
They're fearful. And that is actually worse because then that person doesn't feel like they have any support. So it's just better to let them know you're there for them, to support them. And, you can send them like a gift card, you can send them flowers just to cheer, like, hey, I know this has been a really hard week, so I just wanted to get you a treat for yourself, or just like those little reminders that you're thinking of them, but without all of the different cliches that usually are kind of sometimes dismissive to what they're experiencing.
So I'd love to hear more about kind of your journey going into IVF, and like what was the point when you realized, okay, we need to try something different, and like how long was it through that process?
So it was about 2.5 years working with the high-risk pregnancy specialist. Then they ultimately found out that one of the medications that was best for my body was the most dangerous for a baby. It was like you couldn't even carry. And what is amazing, I'm so glad we got a second opinion because the first doctor missed it.
Oh, wow.
They cleared us to move forward.
Oh, wow.
And this other doctor was like, wait, you're on this medication? They're like, that's a class D, which means can lead to stillbirth.
Oh my gosh.
And so it was a medication that the other doctors weren't familiar with.
Wow.
And so they cleared us, and we thankfully got a second opinion. And
always get a second opinion.
we got a second opinion, and that's when they kind of said, unfortunately, you have to choose because this medication, you need this medication for your health, but it's like a pregnancy wouldn't be viable.
Yeah.
But the alternative, because we were like, well, maybe I can switch my medication, and they're like, that can be really damaging to your organs.
Oh my gosh.
And so they've ultimately just said it's just safer that you don't carry it all. So that was kind of what led us to that decision, was just that ultimate information from our doctors.
Wow. And then Lexi was just over there all these years
Yeah.
without you even knowing, just
Right.
thinking about
She
that.
was ready.
And that's such a beautiful gift, and even bonded you guys probably so even deeper than you already were.
We are so excited. Our gift to Lexi, they have always dreamed of going to Italy.
Amazing.
And so our gift to them as a couple, trip to Italy on us, is just to say, like, we know you've done so much for us. Thank you so much for bringing Juliana into our lives. So we want to do that. And then they said what would be even a dream for them is if we could do a couple's trip together to Italy.
Amazing.
And so they're like, we're willing to wait a couple years until Jules is a little older so we can like all go together. So we're taking them to Italy in June as our thank you gift.
Beautiful.
Shout out to Lexi, because that is one of the most beautiful gifts that you could ever give anyone. I mean, such an incredible sacrifice.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
She's an incredible person.
And you really knew that you could probably trust her, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when it's someone, a surrogate that you maybe don't know, and, it's different when you actually like know them and have grew up with them, and you just fully know that your baby's in a loving body, being created. But kind of moving towards into, your first experience with motherhood, having her, considering your disability and what that looks like, raising her, even as a baby, like feeding her and all of that, like what was all of that like?
Honestly, it was really challenging
Yeah.
Yeah, I have adapted to living life with one arm my whole life. Or not, I shouldn't say my whole life, since the accident.
Sure. Yeah.
And it wasn't until I had a baby that I was brutally reminded that I have a disability. Because so many baby products are two-handed. Like there are so many car seats that no matter how you configure your body, you have to push a button on opposite sides at the same time to unlock it.
And then pull it out. And
so even if you can't push a button and pull it out at the same time with that car seat. So we had to find, it took forever to find a car seat that physically I could get out of, the base. And so that was a big journey of just strollers. There was just all the different types of gear that are basically just weren't made for people with disabilities or aren't very accessible. I've thought about making a blog about this.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's not something that even crossed my mind,
Tell us your thoughts on it. Let's hear the blog. We got time.
I know, we got time. I just realized I need to start making more resources, but it's in our spare time. On these are all the baby-friendly products that you should think about. Because I think a lot of parents, once they have a second kid, they might have one arm occupied with another.
There you go.
One-handed products are actually really helpful.
Right.
And I think also just the learning curve of, you're picking up the baby and now it's not like you're picking up your bag and if you drop it, you drop it. It's like it's a baby. And so you don't want anything to happen to her, but I also have to learn how to modify everything. So changing her diapers in the beginning with my feet, I would have to do it on the floor.
That's so amazing.
And use my feet to help me.
Yeah.
So that was just an adjustment of trying to figure, I'm glad I had an SUV. So if I was out of my house, I can lay the back seats down so I have a flat surface so I can sit down and use my feet
to change her.
Right. Yeah. So there was all these different types of adjustments that I hadn't really been faced with for 20 years. Yeah, big adjustment, but it also was empowering to encourage people that I think a lot of times people with disabilities have some fear going into it and just be like, you will find a way. I really believe that each person, if you wanted this baby is was meant for you. And Jules was meant for me. Yeah. She's gonna learn to experience life with me. And now she's just so used to it that it's just natural, right? We do things differently.
It's just normal for her.
Right, it's normal for her.
Was there a point where she started asking questions, maybe noticing that things were different, or was it kind of like she was born into it, she never really questioned things? What was that like?
Yeah, she definitely started asking lots of questions when she turned about 2.
Oh, okay, pretty early.
Yeah, she wasn't able to verbalize all her questions until 2.5 or so, but initially she would start clapping or doing things with her hands, and she would ask me to copy her, and then I couldn't copy her the same way. And originally it would be frustrating for her. And so when she started having more vocabulary, she would actually say, "No, mommy, with both hands. And I would then, remind her well, mommy only has the use of one hand. So this is how I clap. And then it would kind of be this process for her to learn that. And there were some days where she would be like, okay. She would understand that and take that. And other times she would get frustrated at just trying to kind of grasp that concept, that she could see my arm, but it didn't move. And then it was this beautiful transition where this one day she said, "Mommy, let's clap. And I was just kind of ready to go into that kind of reminder of well, mommy has to clap like this. And she's like, "No, let's clap together." And she held her hand out against mine for my hand to meet hers and be like, "No, we're just going to clap together."
That's so sweet.
And it was just so cute because it was this is such a powerful lesson where she didn't want to exclude me because I can't clap. She just modified how we clap so that I'm included. And I was like, that's how we should, that's the kindness and curiosity. We are created to be curious and to learn and to adapt. And our culture could be so much kinder to people with disabilities if they just had that curiosity to be like, okay, how could we modify this so everyone could be included? How could we modify this playground so a kid that had a wheelchair could also come and play? If we had more ramps, or if we didn't have mulch in playgrounds because those aren't wheelchair accessible. Yeah. Things like that, where so many more kids that have disabilities, if they have any kind of walking crutch or anything like that, mulch is really hard. And tons of playgrounds, that's all they
Majority
have.
Of them.
Majority of
right.
them.
Yeah.
And so then all of a sudden, a kid that has a disability with their legs is excluded.
That is such a beautiful thing that Jules did. And I think thinking about like becoming a mom, I'm so excited to like revisit through my child's eyes the beauty and the wonder of the world, and honestly the lack of judgment. Kids aren't born judging and putting into boxes and not accepting. It's almost something that's kind of taught, right? So if you teach your child or expose them to people that are different from them, it makes them be like a better person, a more empathetic person, like you said, more willing to like adjust themselves to include everyone. I think that's so beautiful and amazing, and we just can learn so much from our children, can't we?
And we can teach them how to have conversations. A lot of times, like I've actually taught about how adults can be curious with kindness around disabilities, and a lot of that has come from what I teach my daughter and how do we have that conversation. The power of asking permission to ask a question, because a lot of kids might, it's natural for them to point at something that they think is unique, or, and we talk about, okay, so let's try not to point, but
Yeah.
It's good that they want to learn. They want, that person's in a wheelchair. Why do they need a wheelchair? And instead of, I think a lot of parents feel so uncomfortable when their kid says that out loud. They're like, oh my gosh, they're going to say the wrong thing.
They're like, shush
and they just
them.
like shush them.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that's helpful either, because then they're learning to like avoid that situation altogether.
Just not acknowledge it. Yes.
And I was in a wheelchair for a short period of time, and I would have people cross the street completely just to not make eye contact with me because they felt so awkward around a person in a wheelchair. And I was just only there for a few weeks, but because I had surgery.
What did that feel like?
It was so isolating. Like you feel lonely. You feel like no one wants to engage with you and look you in the eye because they don't know what to say. And it was one of those things where that experience, it was just a brief experience around when I had the surgery, that I was like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine what that would be like.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that my arm is paralyzed, so I kind of don't have that experience to that extent. It's like there's two extremes. You can either launch with an invasive question, which sometimes can be insensitive, or you just avoid it altogether and then avoid the person. Neither one is really that helpful, because we don't want to teach our kids not to be curious, but just simply asking permission. Like, hey, why don't you ask them if they wouldn't mind answering a question about the wheelchair? And then she could say, sir, can I ask you a question about your wheelchair? And how empowering for them to make a choice, to say, sure, I'd love to tell you about my wheelchair. Or they can say no. And then they're learning also, okay, we need to respect that they said no, and we can move forward.
Yeah, I think that's such a really interesting and beautiful way to approach it, because you don't want to, I think that you're right, a lot of people have fear around disabilities and they just avoid it completely, and they don't know how to engage with the person, so they just don't, or they're really rude about it or shaming that person about it. And we include people by having conversations. We connect with people by having conversations, and opening that door to have that conversation is really beautiful.
Well, one of the things I really admire about you, Kelly, is that you are just so resilient, and like your story, I just think it shows your creativity in the face of adversity, that you've faced these really, really traumatic obstacles, and you've overcome them with creativity and perseverance. And I just think it's so beautiful. I would love to hear kind of what helped you get through some of these losses that you've suffered, how you got through that, and like the mindset that you took into those situations, and maybe what you've learned from that.
Oh, big question, Zach. Well, thank you first for saying that. I think, I'm a person of faith, so that's an honest answer, that my faith for sure has played a part in giving me hope. But I think also learning to shift your mindset while you're in it, because I think sometimes when you are in a trial or adversity, it can feel all-consuming. It can feel like you're just in this black pit and you're never going to get out. And it's hard to see hope, and it's hard to see light, and it's hard to see any kind of purpose that's going to come from this. And I think if we started shifting our focus to more of what's the next 24 hours, I need to start thinking about, for the next 24 hours, I need to focus on strength. I need to focus on endurance. I need to focus on, having wisdom just to think about how to navigate this. And then every day you feel affirmed, like, okay, today I had the strength. Today I had the strength to get through today. That's an accomplishment. Just taking it day by day, and then every day that you are seeing, like, I had the strength to get through today. You start feeling a little bit of hope that I am making progress. And I think when we shift that mindset towards just focus on the next 24 hours, that little bit can turn into all of a sudden you're seeing light, you're seeing hope, you're seeing progress. And then you look back and you're like, I just got through the craziest experience and I'm here and I did it. And then as you go through more, hopefully people don't, but when you've had a lot of trials, you learn to trust that you can get through this. And I think also allow ourselves to grieve, like allow ourselves to feel the feelings. I think in the past with different trials, I have felt like all my friends were uncomfortable with really hard news and they were sad for me, which is great and empathetic. And I almost felt like to take care of them, I needed to skip the grieving part and be like positive right away. But then I was ended up being resentful, not of them, but just resentful in my faith and resentful within myself because I never allowed myself to really be sad.
Did you ever feel like a imposter syndrome where you felt like you should feel differently than you did feel or anything like that?
Yeah, we can feel like we're supposed to feel a certain way. Or especially of a person of faith, at times people put me on a pedestal to say like, oh, she's just so strong. And then it was almost like I didn't have permission to be weak, if that makes sense. Or I felt that way sometimes. Totally. Like if I told someone that I was in a really hard place and just wanted to vent, they would be like, what? Like, you're
supposed to be this perfect, miracle that's like never mad or upset about what you've gone through. Yeah.
Yeah. And it felt like a trap in some ways of like, well, no, I need to also have the freedom to grieve and to mourn and to be angry and to be sad. And I can sit in that. I can still have my faith. For me, I believe God still meets you there.
Of course.
And, I think that can be such a beautiful journey of just realizing we need to get a little more comfortable as a culture to just sit. Like sometimes you just need to sit, be sad, grieve, and then it's the next step of, okay, now I took that time to like emotionally grieve, and now I'm going to move forward and focus on the next 24 hours and have the mindset to focus on strength and focus on endurance and then focus on wisdom. And those were my three things, was like wisdom, strength, endurance. And then it really kind of opens up your perspective. You kind of zoom out and start seeing it from a bigger point of view. And then you're like, okay, I can see a way out of this.
So when you say that, like, what did that actually look like concretely in like a day-to-day thing? Like if today you're focusing on perseverance, what did that look like for you? How did you actually do that?
Well, as someone in faith, for me, it would be definitely like prayer and meditation would be my focus. Like my mindset would be like in prayer, praying for strength, praying for endurance, focusing on that. And then the next day seeing, okay, like God answered that prayer. Like I have the strength. And I think that, the general idea can apply to anyone regardless of their faith or their spirituality. But I think for me, it was like that meditation on, it's not as concrete as like an action, but more of like a mindset.
It's like a mantra too that people could maybe use. And yeah, that's beautiful. I find that when you just kind of following back up to your point about how we need to be more comfortable with like sitting in that grief and allowing others to sit in their grief and their pain, because I've definitely been guilty of like trying to, when someone comes to me with a problem or a pain, I'm like, how do I help them fix this? Like, well, you could do this, and you could do this. And I remember a roommate of mine a long time ago was like, sometimes I just need you to just listen. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm just going to sit here and listen and say, you know what, that really sucks. And that's so crappy. And I'm sorry. And I'm here to just listen, and like giving that space to people. I can see in my life once I kind of realized that, how that shifted my role in people's lives. And they did come to me more because they felt like I was just there to listen to them, not to help them fix their problem. And there's a time and a space for that, right? Like, what type of step, what next steps do I take? Like, what do you think? Right? But if you're not necessarily asked that, just validating is such a powerful thing. And again, our society can sometimes shy away from pain. Like in a lot of other cultures, when someone passes away, everyone is together and everyone is there, not just for like the funeral, but for days in a row, right? It's something that I think we could definitely do better at, is allowing people to just be validated in their pain and their grief, and that's okay.
That's actually a lesson I've been wanting to, or that I'm hoping I can continue to teach Jules, is that we oftentimes put pain or hardship in the liability column of our lives when it really deserves to be in the asset column of our lives. Because
Sorry,
Smiling.
my stomach growled because of that.
No,
There's a lot of like things happen at once.
Just for the audience, they might not know, like when you talk about asset and liability, like those concepts. I smiled because I'm familiar with the concept, but I didn't expect you to categorize it like that. So maybe break that
like
down.
a pro and
for
a
someone
con,
listening.
right?
Totally. I mean, I think that we just put it in the evil category, right? Like it's like something that's bad, and it's not something that is anything that we would put in a positive way. But the things that trials produce, like some of the most amazing people I've ever met have gone through really hard things. And I think sometimes we forget that trials really refine us. They make us more humble. They make us have more empathy. I think we can experience deep joy even fuller when you've also experienced deep pain. You appreciate it more. And so trying to like encourage Jules, like there's this one hill that's by her favorite park, and she sometimes like will complain and we'll talk about how like she's like, oh, it's so steep. And I'll be like, isn't it amazing that our bodies can do hard things? And so then now when she's going, she's like, I can do hard things. I can do hard things, you know? And so just like teaching her endurance, like not just physically, but emotionally, that we can do hard things. And trials and pain, even with our kids, can teach them beautiful life lessons.
Yes.
I like the frame or the labeling that you use on those concepts, specifically saying asset and liability, because contextually, like a liability is something that is depreciating in value or costing you money. And an asset is something that is appreciating in value and making you money, like categorically, if we were to break those apart. When we're talking about finances, but when you use that in the context of like a life experience, I think we can think of experiences and struggles categorizing them the same way. And the decision whether this is an asset or a liability it's personal, right? Like an event that is traumatic, you can take that and you can have that continually costing you mental energy and pulling and draining on you. Or it can become an asset. You can treat it like an asset, as something that is actually strengthening you and just that mental flip. I don't think I've heard someone use those terms asset and liability with regards to life experiences. So that was why
I hadn't either. I think that's so cool. I think that makes so much sense. It's a really great way to explain it.
So I would love just to hear a little bit more about your motherhood experience, and maybe particularly since we're getting ready for that, the very beginning. Could you tell us maybe a story about that first week and what that was like, and kind of what was going through your mind?
Well, I would say our first week was very unique in some ways that it would be hard to relate with in some ways, just because I didn't birth her. And so that was a different experience, because I was wanting to make sure I could take care of Lexi, like as she was physically recovering, and also be present. And she was so amazing, and she donated breast milk and pumped so we could give Jules breast milk.
Gosh.
It was, I mean,
that's so amazing.
There were so many layers.
I'm trying not to cry.
I know.
I might make
there were so many layers. And I think that just really giving each other grace, like you and your partner, you're both going to be really tired, and it's going to be one of the most beautiful times of your lives. And also the first month is hard.
The hardest.
It's hard. It's really hard. It's a lot of
what is
not
this?
sleeping. And so, and I think each couple will find the dynamic that works for you. We found the dynamic where a lot of times in the beginning, one of us would feel guilty if the other person was awake. So then the other person would stay up, so we'd both be awake. But then realized that actually wasn't very helpful, because then we were both exhausted the next day. So if I was up with Jules, and we also had the unique situation where we were feeding with bottles, so there was a little more flexibility on feedings in general. But I would oftentimes, be up with her at night, and I would say encourage Augustine to sleep, because then he was able to care for me so much like better and with more capacity the next day, because he was more rested. But I think a lot of times you feel guilty for sleeping if your partner's not sleeping. So I think each couple will figure out what's best for you, but that was one experience for us, that we actually found that if he was going to be doing the late night feeding, then I would actually go to bed and get rest so that we could better care for each other. One of us could actually handle it.
Yeah, totally.
So that was one thing that we just learned in the first month that worked for us. But
I'm gonna be breastfeeding. That's the goal, at least. We'll see if that, how that pans out. But I do want him to bottle feed as well, so
Yeah.
that I can,
Yeah.
you know, I also want her to see him as her caretaker very early on. Too.
I've offered
It's
to
not
take the
just
night
me.
shift.
Yeah, the thing is like when you're
Yeah.
breastfeeding your breasts, like this is turning into a whole other conversation, but like they get really sore apparently if you don't either pump or feed the baby.
Yeah.
And so it's like it will.
So you just don't think you're going to be able to sleep.
I think I'm either going to be pumping or
yeah.
feeding her every 2 hours. Yeah.
Did you feed her every 2 hours, or was there a
Between
little,
2 and 3.
2 and 3 hours?
When they're new like
When they're
that,
in
their
the first
stomach
month,
is like
yeah.
so tiny. So when it goes, and then you have to fill it up again, and then it goes, and they're growing so rapidly.
So how did you deal with the sleep in that situation where it's every 2 to 3 hours?
I mean,
Were you
just-
sleeping in the interim, like when they were sleeping, or?
You're so exhausted that usually you can fall asleep right away.
Right, yeah.
So like the moment that you put her down and you realize that she's asleep, you just go back to bed and it would be instant, and it would feel like you barely
You're like,
were
did I even
asleep because then you're
sleep?
because then you're awake again. So you know it's gonna be fun.
You just get through it. I think that's
Yeah,
it's funny
it's-
because I think Zach asks these questions like, well, you know, to people like to my mom or like our friends, and it's just like you just have to like literally power through it. You just
Yeah.
like get through it. You just do it. He's like, no, she doesn't have to eat every 2 hours, and then I'm like, yeah, honey,
No, she does.
she does.
And then, but once she gets to 5 weeks, then you know they are then able to start learning some like self-soothing techniques. And obviously, each parent's going to have a different opinion
Pacifiers or
on
whatever.
you know feeding and
Yeah.
sleeping and all like that. We did like a really natural kind of approach to that, but we still wanted to give her those tools of self-soothing. And so she actually, I mean, this is not an experience for a lot of parents, so I'm going to just preface that. But we were very blessed that by 3 months she was sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night.
That's amazing.
And so
Oh
there
my
are,
gosh.
but and it was just a matter of teaching her the self-soothing
yeah.
like techniques. Once she was old enough to go a few more hours without eating, then kind of not always intervening because
Right away.
Sometimes they make noise, and then a lot of times as a new parent, you pick them up immediately, but they might not even be awake yet.
They're just like making a noise.
They're just making noise.
Yeah.
And then so just giving them like a beat, just like waiting for a minute, and then a lot of times they would just fall back asleep, and you're like,
oh, then you're
Okay.
like, okay.
okay, they're going back asleep again.
Because they get like used to you picking them up, then they're like training you. I want to be picked up, so I'm gonna cry.
Yeah.
You know, even though I don't necessarily need anything besides wanting to be picked up. Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, I guess we could just wrap it up with, because you have so much, Kelly, that we'd love to unpack, and we definitely would love to do this again, where we can really get in, spend a little bit more time talking about your life story, because there is a lot, and I think there's so much that people can learn from you in just your story and just how to deal with adversity, because you have faced a lot of it, and I think you've done pretty well at how you've handled it. As far as parenting advice goes, because we are new parents, if you were to go back and give yourself beginning your first year as a parent, what is the number one thing you're like, I wish I knew?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, this is going to sound kind of cheesy.
That's okay, say it.
Okay.
We love the cheesy.
Okay,
Zach and
I'm
I are
like,
like
it's gonna be
literally
cheesy.
so cheesy all the time.
Go
I
Packers.
would, okay, yeah. I think that I just, you know, you just can't quite fully fathom how much love is just going to explode. And it's not necessarily like advice in a way that's like, I wish I knew, because I'm not really fully answering your question, but it's just something I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew I was going to love my baby
Of
so
course,
much. And
yeah.
I already did as she was growing. It's amazing. Like, did you, she smiled at me today? Like, you know, just the smallest interactions make your entire day. Just like seeing her overcome, seeing her learn, seeing her grow, and it happens so fast that first year. You know, I mean, going literally from being a newborn to then sitting up and crawling and pulling up on furniture, and you know, just like there's just so much growth so quickly in that first year that it makes it so fun, because you're excited about every milestone that they're hitting and every like little accomplishment, or you know, things that they're learning, or things that, you know, you're starting to see their personality as they get older. And like, you know, she has been spunky from the beginning, so we saw that even the first year.
That's so
and
cute.
I think the more you start seeing that personality come out, you're just so excited. And I think you guys are beautiful people, have gone through so much, and you have so much to teach your daughter that's coming so soon. And I just can't wait to watch you guys in Parenthood. You guys are going to kill it. You're going to rock it.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being here. We just appreciate you so much. And we're actually going to go take some photos.
All right.
Go do a maternity session.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
Kelly.
you, Kelly.
Thank you, guys.